Hi, writers. That sounds like highlighters. Welcome to Writing Club by School of Plot. I'm Stara. Today we're taking 40 fantasy cliches and we're going to tier rank them from hot fairies to women with two daggers, specifically two, one for each hand. I'm going to be ranking these tropes on a scale that goes like this. If I love it, I'm going to rank it as hot buttery pie. This is a food that always sounds so good in fantasy novels, so it's the top tier. If it's something that I'm pretty neutral on, I'm ranking it soup. This is a pretty standard food in fantasy novels. It's not really given much love. It's going to be my neutral ranking, soup. If I'm not a fan of a trope, I'm going to call it lumpy porridge. I actually love porridge. I'm a very boring person, but fantasy writers always make it sound so unappetizing. It's always so lumpy and tepid, and the characters are so mad about having to eat it. It's like a punishment. So that's my unfavorable ranking, porridge. I just want to be clear that just because I don't like something, it doesn't mean that that thing is bad or that you shouldn't write about it or enjoy reading it. This episode is unserious, so please write whatever makes you happy. That's what's important. So, right, I'm going to start with a packet of cheese and onion crisps. You may think that this is not a fancy cliche, but I want to tell you where this came from. So I was in the pub with my friends and they asked for a packet of cheese and onion crisps. And in my head, I was like, a packet of cheese and onion sounds like a fantasy novel. If you read a lot of fantasy, you'll be familiar with this format of title: a noun of noun and noun, a song of ice and fire, a court of mist and fury, children of blood and bone, a packet of cheese and onion. I'm quite neutral on titles that follow this format. A lot of really cool books use this titling format convention, but it does lead to a lot of books that sound kind of samey, especially when they're like a dagger of night and blood, an assassin of, a blade of, a crown of. I kind of feel like you could just make one up and then go on Goodreads and, if that book that you've just made up is a real book, you have to take a shot or something. So I am going to give it soup. It can be done well, it can be done in a way that I find kind of samey, so soup. Okay, the next one is the door frame leaning apple chomper. So I used this term on my Instagram, and you guys actually were pulling out examples from romantasy novels. So I actually didn't know who these characters were, but it's honestly a thing in wider fantasy where these sort of snarky, smirking guys will lean on a doorframe, they'll have a wry chuckle, they might quip. And they usually take a bite out of an apple when they're speaking to just show how little they care. I think the apple thing comes from it's a fruit that you can eat with a knife, which I think writers correctly think looks really cool. And sometimes they're also peeling the apple with a knife because I guess they don't like pesticides or something. And I think it comes from like, oh, I care so little about what's going on that I'm gonna have a snack. That's how little I care. And I get it. That's fun. They also, whenever they're having a fight, they'll be really funny about it. Like, they won't just straightforward brute force you. They'll be like swirling their sword around and like making Three Musketeers style quips, which I love. I can't say anything bad about that. So, I'm going to give it a hot buttery pie rating. The next trope is lazy names. So the sea is called the Great Sea. The capital city is called the capital or the city. The language that the book is written in is called Common or the Common Tongue. I kind of get this one. There are circumstances when a common language is needed. For example, and I'm not a historian, but in the Middle Ages, traders would use like this Italianish language to communicate with merchants from other countries, which is where the term lingua franca comes from, I think. So yeah, situational common languages make sense. every single person in the world speaking the same language for some unexplained reason, and then it gets called common tongue. It's a bit more tenuous, but like also it's okay for fantasy to be whimsical. I appreciate a bit of thoughtful world building, but I don't think it's the law that like everything has to be super well thought out. As for naming cities, the city or the capital, it's fine. I would like a name, but I get it. Like in fantasy novels, sometimes it can be difficult to keep track of every single name of every single thing, so fair enough. The sea being called the Great Sea, again, yeah, there's a lot of names. Fair enough, I'm gonna give it a soup. Lumpy porridge. Yeah, I'm gonna give it a soup. Speaking of soup, the next trope is bread, cheese, apple stew. So, you're at the tavern with a flask or a flagon of ale, I don't know what a flagon is, or perhaps a cup of hot spiced wine. If you're humble, you may have packed like a stale bit of bread, an apple, and a hunk of hard cheese. They may not be much, but your aching stomach thinks they're a king's feast. Or you have stew. Um, I love descriptions of food in fantasy novels. I think it's so cozy, and this trope is so ubiquitous that whenever I in real life eat the, bread, apple, cheese, stew combo, I feel like a little fantasy adventurer. So I actually rate this very highly. So hot buttery pie for this one. Just any description of food in a fantasy novel, I'm into it, except for the cold lumpy porridge thing. I don't like that at all. The next trope is bad embroiderer. So, okay, you're a girl, sometimes a princess or like a highborn lady in a fancy novel, and your mother or your stepmother, someone like that, expects you to be a lady, but you're just so bad at embroidery and dancing and all the lady things. You just want to swing your sword around like your brother and ride a horse really, really fast. I understand where this trope comes from. It used to be, way back when, that the only role for women in fantasy novels, well, for like quote unquote good women in fantasy novels, was this sort of classic Sleeping Beauty princess role where they're sort of demure and fair and innocent and good and elegant and charming and potentially good at singing, but not much else. There was this pushback from a lot of female and male, but generally female authors, where they wanted to subvert that and they wanted to write not just an ethereal, delicate princess with no agency, but also a more rebellious, tomboyish female character, like a fighting princess. Not to say that that didn't ever exist before, but I think it was definitely a challenge to the mainstream type of good woman in fantasy. And I think in 2024, we've become so used to this tomboyish female character that a lot of people are sick of it. They're like, hey, what's wrong with femininity? What's wrong with being an ethereal woman who can sing? And yeah, I get it. I think it would be lovely now to have both types of women and more types of women existing in fantasy. And I think really the way around this is to just have more female characters in the same novel so that there's sort of space for different types of femininity in fantasy. Because a lot of these bad embroiderer characters also do kind of hate like the singing pretty princess women. They're like, oh, I'm so much better than you because I can fight. I would just love to see also female friendships in fantasy. It definitely exists, but it's something I enjoy seeing. So the bad embroiderer is a trope that I am honestly fine with, as long as she doesn't hate on other types of women. And even if she does, like if that is then challenged, I would really appreciate that. So I'm gonna give it a soup because it really depends on how it's done. For me personally, I said that so strangely. The next one is all countries are Europe. This is when in a fantasy novel there's a kingdom, potentially multiple kingdoms, and they're all Europe, and there's usually like a one-on-one comparison. So for example, there could be a rainy imperialistic island or a super cold country where everyone wears furs and drinks strong spirits and it's like a massive. I think a lot of it comes from people's stereotypes of real countries, and a lot of it is sort of signifiers being like, okay, so this world doesn't have an England, but this country is this world's England. When it comes to countries outside of Europe, they're usually not present. If they are, they're usually sort of a hodgepodge. Like, there might be one where there's like sand and magic carpets and genies, and it's sort of far away. And then there might be one that's sort of based on East Asia. Rarely anywhere else, I think. In 2024, there are definitely more voices in fantasy, so we're having more diverse perspectives, which leads to, different types of kingdom in fantasy world building, which is cool. I would love to see something that's not like one-on-one, like, okay, this is the fantasy version of Scotland. Like, that's really cool, but I would also like to see fantasy worlds that are their own thing. But also, I get it, like, it's hard to divorce fantasy worlds from their original influence, and yeah, I get it. Soup again. Sorry, I'm being so neutral on some of these, but it's true, like, it really depends how it's done. I can't hate it. So the next one is bow and arrow or two daggers woman. This is when the only weapons that women are allowed to use are a bow and arrow or two daggers, like one in each hand. I don't know if this comes from D&D or like some RPG game. I remember back in the day there was Dragon Fable and Adventure Quest, and one of those you could choose a rogue who had two daggers, and I think it was an archer maybe. I guess there's like a stereotype that a bow and arrow is elegant compared to like an axe or a sword or a club or something. The two daggers, I don't know, I guess it's like cute. I mean, obviously it's not cute, but like aesthetically it looks kind of cool. Yeah, I would love to see female characters with like a big axe. What do you call it? There's sort of archetypes for each member of the fantasy gang. The one that's like the muscle, like the strong character, they're usually like an orc or something. I would like a lady one, that would be nice. I think I just appreciate reading fantasy novels that are different from each other. So it would be cool if women could have more of a diversity of weapons, also men. It would be cool if we could have a two dagger boy. I'm gonna give this one a soup again. I can't hate it, but I would love some slightly different characters or different weapons for characters. Elves are always right. Okay, so the thing that you need to remember about elves is that they are better than you. They're peaceful, tall, hot, and even though they're not brutish, they're really good at fighting. And they're also smart and cool and just better than you. If you're human, they will take great pleasure in lecturing you, and sometimes they're just there to like drop lore and then go away. Like maybe you'll visit them, they'll tell you the history of the land, and then they'll go. Exposition elves. And they're always right, so that's really handy for writers, I guess. I think this is one of those fantasy tropes that has come from the huge impact that the Lord of the Rings series has had. I can't hate it again. I guess I would like to see something fresh though. Like a story about an elf that just sucks. So I'm actually going to give this one lumpy porridge in more modern books because let's mix it up. Like give me like the worst elf that I've ever encountered. Just an elf that's worse than a human and still lectures people about how great elves are. I would love that. Next onto your tragic father. Okay, so your father was the only good man to ever exist in the corrupt realm or court. Maybe also your mum, but they died tragically trying to protect you, and you blame yourself, but you also miss them, and you worry that you'll never live up to their legacy. Yeah, this happens a lot with the tragic parents. I guess if I were a fantasy parent and I noticed that my kid came out with like cool tattoos or like coloured eyes, I would just throw him in the fire pit. No, that's awful, I'm so sorry. Well, I love parents' issues in fantasy, so if your character has any sort of dramatic or traumatizing family issues, I will eat that up. So I'm going to give this one a hot buttery pie. I really love it and I would love to see more of it, and also different variations on this trope where maybe they didn't die sacrificing you. Maybe they died fighting for the villain and you never knew, and then you found out and then you felt really conflicted about it. That would be cool. Return disbelief. The Dark Wizard is back. The gargoyle army has returned. The evil king is alive. But nobody believes you when you tell them. I see why this one is so popular in fantasy, because it sort of immediately positions the protagonist as an underdog. They are trying to get everyone to believe that whoever has returned, no one believes them, so it's an uphill battle, and they're on their own, and you can't just say, well, why didn't they just tell the Prime Minister? They don't believe them. So it's kind of cool. I like it in YA as well, because it kind of really gives a reason for teenagers to be fighting the Dark Lord or whatever, instead of recruiting adults. I like it. It makes you feel like you're really in with the gang, the main characters, because you believe them too. I like it. I really like it. I'm going to give it a hot buttery pie. Evil advisor. Okay, I'm going to quote Terry Pratchett, which is something I do way too much. It's from Interesting Times. He says, "Are you a devious, plotting, unreliable madman? Ah, good. Then you can be my most trusted advisor." So this is when the king usually has an advisor who's evil. So sometimes the king is like this jolly round man, and then the advisor is this like tall, imposing, shadowy guy. He's always like manipulating the king and like whispering things into his ear. Think Jafar. Jafar is a really good example of this, but it's seen a lot in fantasy, and sometimes the advisor is like someone's uncle. I did some reading about this in a very respectable journal. I'm just kidding, it was TV Tropes, and their theory is that this trope comes from history, that people might not have been able to criticize their monarch directly, like, oh, the king sucks, I hate his new policy. So they would sort of scapegoat the advisor. So now advisors have a bad reputation. I'm actually not going to fact check this, but I choose to believe it. Love an evil advisor, so hot buttery pie for you. Next trope is the ritual. So you're 16, it's your name day. God, I hate name days. It's okay to say birthday. So you're 16, it's your name day, and the ritual is about to begin. Probably the village elders are involved, or the evil monarchy mandated it. Maybe you will get a magic power during the ritual. Maybe you'll get sent away to live with a wizard or be eaten, like maybe it's a sort of Minotaur thing. Is it Minotaur or Minotaur? I rarely enjoy the ritual because a lot of writers choose to take it in the exact same direction. But you could spice it up, you could subvert it in some way, like, I don't know, just a lot of books begin with you turning 16 and then having to go to a ritual. Could spice it up. I'm gonna give it lumpy porridge, I'm so sorry. The next trope is connected to the ritual, and it can be, cannot be. It's called the fair. So every, I don't know, harvest moon or solstice or something, there's a fair, and then all the girls in the town get like pretty for the fair, and maybe they bought new ribbons, and your family is like usually poor, so your mother has been saving up her best lard for the fair. You'll finally eat a pastry at last. I love descriptions of food, and I really enjoy the word buttery, which always seems to come up during these fair scenes. There's like a hot buttery smell wafting through the crisp autumn air or whatever. And I also enjoy the like merriment scenes and the descriptions of rural dancing. It's all very cute, and it serves as a good contrast to the dark and horrible thing that like immediately comes after the fair. So I love the fair. Hot buttery pie for the fair. The next trope, I actually feel kind of bad for labeling this as a trope, because I mean there's real people with red hair, but redheads, they're very popular in fantasy, aren't they? If you have red hair and emerald orbs, not eyes but orbs, you must see yourself represented a lot in fantasy, especially if your name is like Tessa or Nessa or Odessa. There's usually like a fiery personality attached to these characters, and I'm not gonna lie, I eat it up every single time. I love a fancy redhead. I love the personality that they always give these fantasy redheads, and I love the earth powers that they often have as well. Hot buttery pie for not only fantasy redheads, but just anyone with red hair. I am so jealous. I wish I had red hair. That would look quite strange on me, but I would love it. Oh no, the next one is controversial. It's hot fairies. Okay, so I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry in advance. Okay, I'm so sorry. So, the way that you can tell a fairy is going to be a super hot 7-foot guy with 18 abs is if the writer spells fairies like F-A-E instead of F-A-I. So the F-A-I fairies are like these cute little kids with wings, like really tiny, Tinkerbell. F-A-E fairies are sort of like a rugby player mixed with a duke. They're really similar to elves, except they live in a fairy court and have wings sometimes, and maybe they're iridescent or like extra tall. They're like humans, but with a different moral code and also more money. Like, they live in these like really nice houses and they have brilliant clothes and they're just hotter. So okay, personally, I would really like to see some weirder fairies. Okay, I guess I could appreciate a hot fairy, I suppose, in theory, but there's so much potential to make them super odd. Like, give them a massive dandelion head or a face made of bees. I love weird fairies. Have you read Andrew Lang's fairy books from the 1800s? There's this one story I love about a fairy who's just a massive raspberry with arms and legs. He's really jolly and has a cool power, which is raspberries. His power is raspberries. He just like gives you more raspberries. That's his power. And I'm so fine with that. I want someone to rewrite the Sarah J Maas books, but where Rysand is just a big raspberry in a waistcoat. See, I get the appeal of hot fairies. They're sort of solitary and fantastical and morally grey, maybe scary with like unique features, like green skin. This is Shrek. I don't know what to say. I'm really neutral on hot fairies. I personally don't like them and would give them a lumpy porridge, but I really understand the appeal and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't send assassins after me, especially not if they're a lithe female with one plait down the back and 2 daggers. They're the deadliest sort. Okay, the next one is the 700-year-old boyfriend. So these are romances when a girl, usually really young, gets a 700-year-old ageless boyfriend, and he's really like wise and immortal, but he looks young and good, I guess. I know this one's super controversial, so I'm just going to rate this as lumpy porridge and leave it there. It's just not for me. What I do want to see though in fantasy are old characters, maybe they're 700, who actually look old and maybe have a romance with someone who's also old. I don't like how everyone in modern fantasy needs to be like 35 years old maximum, except for wizards and mentors. Old people are cool, and I would like to see an old person get a 700-year-old ageless boyfriend as well. Like in What We Do in the Shadows, actually, an elderly woman dates a young-looking, ageless, super old vampire, and it's fresh. I like it. It's different. Am I odd for that? You can tell me. The next trope is the dragons came back. So there were dragons, and then for some reason they went away, and now they're back. This kind of disrupts the status quo of the fantasy world. Maybe an evil nation starts using dragons for war, and your main character has to also ride a dragon, but in like a chill and friendly way. Sometimes dragons are almost godlike. They can sense conflict in the world, and they've returned because the humans need them and their guidance. The world just got so bad that the dragons had to come back. I don't know. I don't care. I like dragons. So if you're going to have any type of dragon, I like it. Hot buttery pie. Love a dragon. Fantasy slurs. So sometimes there's a racial or species prejudice in fantasy, and it comes with its own magical slur. Like, sometimes vampires are called leeches, and in Artemis Fowl, I think fairies call humans mud people. I guess it can make sense in a world building context, and I definitely prefer it to the use of real slurs in my escapist literature, I guess. It really depends on how it's done and whether it calls uncomfortably to a real world prejudice, which is often handled quite clumsily in fantasy analogies. It's hard to generalize. It really depends on how it's done. I think in Discworld, dwarves really hate being called lawn ornaments or something, and I thought that was fun. Soup. Soup for this. It really, really, really depends on how it's done. It has potential, but it also has potential to be extremely uncomfortable, so soup. By the gods. So this one is related, I guess. In fantasy novels, instead of oh my god, they often say oh my gods or by the gods, plural, and that's meant to make you feel like you're in another world because they say something slightly different and it's like, oh, world building. There's also often some fantasy like swear words, like they say like, oh, by the seven devils or something. It just sounds like self-censoring when they do that, which I don't love, but I don't know. And they also substitute birthday for name day or something like that, or it's your day, it's your special day. And sometimes they also replace exclamations, currency, days of the week, hours, o'clock with their own fantasy versions. I like it when it's done thoughtfully, like if the author has come up with currency and they say, oh, that'll cost for whatever your currency is called, as opposed to that'll be 4 gold coins. If an author has put thought into these substitutions, I like them. But if they've just sort of tacked on by the gods, it feels a bit lazy and a bit distracting for me personally. So I'm going to give this one lumpy porridge, and I'm so sorry if you like it because I totally understand why people do like it. I hope you're enjoying this podcast. I'm still trying to get comfortable on the microphone, so if you're enjoying it, please do leave me a rating, and if you want, you can add your Instagram handle in the rating, and I can thank you for being so kind as to take the time. Okay, back to the fantasy cliches. The next one is, we're not so different, you and I. So, this one is usually when the villain has got the protagonist like tied up or something, and they're having a tense dinner and they're sipping their wine and they're like, oh, you know, we're not so different, you and I. And I actually like the basis for this. I like it when the villain is sort of like the protagonist if they had made one different choice, or the protagonist if like a sort of like a mirror or a contrast or something. I don't like the phrase we're not so different, you and I, because it's just been used in so many things, but I like the concept of the villain and the hero being quite similar. I really enjoy it actually, so I'm going to give it a hot buttery pie. The next trope is kind of niche. It's something that I've just personally noticed a lot. Whenever an author wants to describe a king, usually as gluttonous or overly indulgent and doesn't care about the peasants, they just care about enjoying themselves, they always like tear a bite out of a boar leg or a turkey leg or like some meat, and they're like chomping, like mouth open chomping. Or I mean, I understand food as a metaphor for just general indulgence, but I do also think that turkey legs or boar legs or whatever are a fantasy staple. Like if you just close your eyes and picture a fantasy king, he's probably holding a turkey leg in his hand. I've never tried a turkey leg, but I bet they're good because those fantasy kings are really chomping on them. Maybe the apple chompers evolve into turkey leg chompers. Gosh. I am going to give this one a soup because, I mean, there's not really any opinion to be had about this. It's just a king eating a boar leg, but it's something I noticed, so I wanted to put it in the list so that I could make it up to 40 points. Oops. The next one is all good women are something. So this is in fantasy when the author has a specific take on femininity and they valorize one type of woman while condemning another in their writing. So, for example, all good women are mothers. So, in this novel, maybe any character who's a mother or who becomes a mother is good, and any character who decides against motherhood is evil and wicked. Or, maybe all good women are fighters, and then the women who care about dresses and necklaces, they suck. Like, ew, girly girls, oh, it's so gross. Well, all good women are something. Needless to say, I hate this. I think there are so many ways to write a woman in fantasy, and I don't like the condemnation of women for such a trivial thing as caring about dresses or deciding not to be a mother. So I'm going to give this one lumpy porridge. I hate it and it sucks. Obviously the same would go for all good men are. Like, I think characters, regardless of their gender, deserve nuance, but I just see this done a lot with women, which is why I decided to name the trope all good women. The next one is a species monolith. So this is something that I've really noticed a lot in fantasy, is that the only species that are allowed diversity are humans and dogs. So some humans can be good and some can be annoying. Some dogs can be horrible and some can be friendly and cute. But all elves are like really stuck up, and all dwarves are like kind of manly and brutish, and all orcs are dumb and evil, and all goblins are yappy and irritating. I hate this a lot. I know that it's been subverted by Terry Pratchett in one of his novels, one of his Discworld novels, and good, rightfully so. I think it would be lovely if we could have a sweet orc or an elf that sucks. An elf that sucks is back. Okay, please write me a novel about an elf that sucks. I will read it. I'm going to give this one lumpy porridge because truly it is so boring when there's a whole fantasy species that is all the same. Like, they're a monolith. I would just like some diversity within each fantasy species. It's just really odd that like all orcs I understand why it happens. I think if all orcs are just like these dumb evil things that suck, it's more palatable when your main character kills them indiscriminately. But I would just like to see some diversity within fantasy species. That would be nice for me. So this trope I give lumpy porridge. Okay, next one is humans suck. Okay, well, this is with a caveat, because in a lot of fantasy novels, humans are really looked down upon. They're like these puny humans. Oh, humans are sort of these like plucky underdogs compared to everyone else, which I understand the appeal of and I enjoy it, but I'm also tired of this, they suck but they have heart. Like, do the dwarves not? Lumpy porridge for you. Next trope is the prophecy. I like prophecies, I'm so sorry. Whenever there's a conversation on social media about, what's your least favourite fantasy trope? Prophecies and chosen ones always come up. I do enjoy a prophecy subversion though. So, for example, the prophecy comes true, but not in the way that they thought it would come true. So, like, what happens a lot is it's like, no man shall ever, and then it turns out to be a woman. Something a bit fresher than that would be nice. I like prophecy subversions, or I like it when the chosen one, I think there was a book from when I was a child called like Un-London or something, and the chosen one is like this beautiful girl and she's so cool, and she completely fails, and then her friend, who's like she's like a bit of a loser or something, just takes on the mantle of chosen one just because someone's got to do it, and they call her the unchosen one, and she succeeds, I think. But I thought that was pretty cute. So yeah, I like prophecies and I like chosen ones, but I prefer the subversions if they're done in a creative and cool way. The next trope, I wish I had numbered these, that would make my life so much easier, is a peasant's revolt. So usually the hero is fighting a villain, and when they're storming the villain's castle or something like that, all the peasants join them. So sometimes it's done really well because there's seeds planted that the peasants aren't happy, and they've been planning a revolution anyway. They've been planning a rebellion against the Dark Lord or whatever. But I don't like it when it just happens just to happen and then they forget about the peasants. Like, what do the peasants get from this? What is in it for the peasants? Do they just kind of go from one cruel king to another nice king, but they're still living in a feudal system which doesn't work very well for them? I don't know, like, why are they joining your rebellion? Like, yes, the villain may treat them badly, but maybe they think, okay, but so's the next guy. Give your peasants more of a reason to join the hero than just convenience, I guess. So this one is the first soup in a while, because I'm neutral on it. It really depends on how it's done. Next trope is humanoids and dragons. This is when, in a fantasy world, the only species that exist are dragons and then some version of a human. There's giants who are big humans, dwarves who are small humans, fairies who are like hot humans or small winged humans, elves who are tall humans who live for a long time and are better than you. You have so much opportunity to create something that's just odd and bizarre and strange. I don't love this trend where every fantasy race just has to be vaguely attractive. Like, give me something weird. I have mentioned before, I like weird fairies. I would enjoy seeing more just strange creatures. Not everything has to be attractive. Like, just give me something odd and strange. I want a mushroom that walks. I want a tree creature. I mean, it's fantasy. It's literally a new world. I'm going to give this one lumpy porridge because I would like to see stranger things in fantasy. Just make fantasy weirder, please. I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I would just like to see weirder fantasy. The next one is medieval stasis. So in your novel, as it is right now, everyone dresses a certain way. They might be wearing corsets and they might be using candles in a certain way, or they might be using a windmill. Those are really strange examples of technology. I'm so sorry. Imagine I said something better and smarter. So if you go back 1,000 years, go forwards 1,000 years, everyone still dresses the same in this fantasy world and they use the same technology. I never noticed this. Like, I've seen people complaining about it online, but I've actually never noticed this in a novel. So I'm gonna give it a soup because I guess I'm just not that attentive. I don't know. I've never noticed this. The next trope is everyone wears trousers. Okay, maybe not women, but every man wears trousers. So I'm not a historian and I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what people in certain time periods were wearing, but whenever I look at a tapestry, that makes it sound like I'm like constantly looking at tapestries, but in the instances where I've seen a tapestry, they're wearing these sort of colourful stockings as men, or more subdued stockings for like a farmer. I'm not noticing that they have these leather trousers that fantasy men wear, you know, those trousers that sort of lace up. Also, I see a lot of ugly hats and page boy haircuts, whereas in fantasy they tend to have fades and really nice beards. And yeah, I guess modern writers are writing in a historical setting, but they still want their characters to seem either attractive or cool. So instead of wearing stockings, they make the men wear trousers. As I've said throughout this podcast, I'm a huge advocate for weirder fantasy. So any choice you can make that makes your fantasy a little bit more odd, I like it. I don't hate when fantasy men wear trousers, especially if it's in an era where they would be wearing trousers anyway, like Victorians or something. But even in eras where they wouldn't be wearing trousers, I don't really notice it so much. So I'm gonna give it soup. But yeah, if you could give your medieval men bright red stockings, I also would not complain. The next one is a bit heavy, so I'm going to discuss it as lightly as I feel is possible and appropriate. But it's the trope where women are always in gendered danger, I shall call it, because it's quote unquote historically accurate. I really don't like this one because it's like, Yeah, if you're a woman, you're constantly in peril in a fantasy novel because that's historically accurate. However, when it's convenient, all historical accuracy is completely forgotten so that the author can make some other stuff happen. It's just women's personal safety that needs to be so grim and dark. I think that this trope is done as a shortcut to turn fantasy into dark fantasy, and I don't like it. I think this could be perhaps because I am a woman and I find it just uncomfortable and difficult to read when all the women in a fantasy novel are in permanent danger of dark events happening to them. I don't like this at all. I think that there are other ways to make fantasy feel dark and realistic that aren't so gendered, and I'm sorry that gender has come up so much in this episode. I'm going to give this one a lumpy porridge and move on. The next one, and I think we've got like 10 more, is the Northern Lands. So this is when a fantasy novel has this vague northern land where Vikings live, and it does not matter when this fantasy world is set, if it's the time of Romans, if it's medieval, if it's like way later. There's just always Vikings in the Northlands, and they wear furs, and sometimes they ride horses, and they're a bit more like brutish and one with nature. I'm actually seeing this a lot less in modern fantasy, but whenever I pick up a fantasy novel from the charity shop and it's a bit older, from like the 70s or something, there's a lot of this going on, and I will give it soup because I don't really care that much about whether there are Vikings or not. They're rarely explored very much, so yeah, soup. Next one is Secret Air. I actually don't like Secret Air. I like it when I really enjoy stories when scrappy nobodies fight or take on power structures. And it kind of ruins it for me when these scrappy nobodies turn out to be the secret heir. Come on, like, couldn't they have just been like a really cool peasant? I like it that when characters are special because of choices that they make, not because of who they were born as. So I'm gonna give this one a cold lumpy porridge, and I'm so sorry if this is your jam because I know a lot of you do like this, and fair enough, I see why. I just don't. The next one is The Great War. So this is when, before the novel takes place, there was a great war, and the Dark Wizard, the Dark Lord, was destroyed, or was he? And everyone sort of refers to this war with great reverence. So, at least it's not as bad as the times of the Great War. Oh, we lost your grandfather in the Great War. And I think I saw this a lot more in 20th century fantasy novels or early 21st, potentially because of the Great War, World War One. I'm seeing it less now, but I like it. I like anything that makes a fantasy world seem old and like it didn't just spring out of someone's mind. You know, things like ancient ruins or things that suggest a religion that is no longer celebrated. Things like that. Like, in the UK, there are a lot of remnants of times that are long gone. Like, when you look at a church, you can sometimes see this face with a lot of leaves on it, the Green Man, and there are theories about where that comes from. Some people say it comes from like a pagan god, some people disagree with that. It just makes the world seem more real when there's details like that, and the Great War, I think, is one of them, and I really like it, so I'm gonna give this one hot buttery pie. I'm gonna try and like fly through the next few because I realize I've kept you for quite a long time. Next one, killable minions. All minions are super easy to kill, but the Dark Lord or whatever is not. I see why it happens because otherwise battle scenes would be long, arduous, and potentially boring, but I don't know, minions are people, and it would be nice to not only see minions putting up more of a fight, but also, if you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, I really enjoy the scenes where the Fire Nation, who are like the villains, where their soldiers are just like having fun or playing cards or whatever, or bantering, I like things that like humanize everyone in the fantasy world. I would like minions, to be less killable and, more human. So I'm going to give that a lumpy porridge, unless you're talking about like those yellow minions, in which case killable minions are fine. I find them very irritating, so they should be eliminated from my vision. Next one, all adults are dumb. This is usually in YA and middle grade fantasy. You want your 16-year-old hero to have a good reason to defeat the villain, so in order to make that happen, you make all adults extremely stupid so that your teenage main cast have a chance. Otherwise, realistically, the adults would do the job. Yeah, why not? Because in middle grade and YA fantasy, why not? You need a reason for your young hero to save the day, so why not have your adults be a little bit silly? And I especially love it in middle grade fiction because when I was the target age demographic for those books, I loved the idea that adults were silly people and children were the smart ones. I'm going to give this a hot buttery pie. Next one is plain sister. This is when your protagonist is plain, or we shan't say ugly because that's going too far. She is definitely very hot, but just in comparison to her super hot sister, she is not that good looking. So if the main character is skinny, then her sister is like, oh, she's so voluptuous. They love that word. And if your main character is larger, she's jealous that her sister is more slender. So whatever your protagonist is, the sister is the opposite, and she has boys swarming her, and your protagonist has none of that. I think it's meant to make your female protagonist more relatable, because she's got insecurities, and a lot of readers of YA, because this is usually a YA trope, have insecurities due to being teenagers, and that is just normal. But I don't know, I'm just kind of sick of it, because the main character is always super gorgeous. It's just not as pretty as her sister, so soup. Last four. Each chapter starts with a quote. I like it. It adds world building and it's cool. As long as the quote is interesting, relevant, and provides information that is actually needed. Love it. Hot buttery pie. Next one is every character is an encyclopedia. So realistically, in our world, in the real world, not every single person knows everything about history. If you ask someone about a war, they might know that it happened, but they might not know exactly why it happened, or every single party who is involved, or whatever. And also, a lot of people are subject to propaganda, or they may have learned events in a certain way because of the country that they're from, but people from other countries might have a different perspective. However, in fantasy, every single character often knows every single thing about history ever. So if your protagonist asks about a war, their friend who does not care about history, doesn't care about anything, will be able to provide exposition because everyone knows everything and everyone is an encyclopedia. I don't like this one. I don't mind when some characters are super knowledgeable about history because fair enough, but I don't love it when all of the characters are, because I think it kind of flattens them. It's not super. I don't think fantasy needs to be realistic, but I think characters need to feel plausible, and I think this kind of undermines that, so I'm going to give it lumpy porridge. And the final one is magic gives you cool tattoos. So if you're magical, you may have coloured eyes or silver hair, purple eyes, red eyes, cool tattoos. Magic will give you some cool different thing about your appearance. It never makes you brunette or anything. It's fine. I guess if I were a parent in a fantasy world and my kid came out with red eyes and black hair and like a super intense face tattoo, I would just immediately drop it in the sea. That's the second time I've made a baby. Okay, Anyway, thank you for listening to my podcast. I'm not even going to rank the last one because of that joke at the end. Thank you for listening, and please do give me a rating if you would like to give me a rating, and follow along for more. Thank you. Bye bye.